So you played Amnesia: The Dark Descent, but you spent a lot of your time just running away from the monsters, screaming and hiding in cupboards. Or you became so emotionally scarred by water splashing that the sight of a box in knee-deep water is enough to send you full-on pooing as you run off the beach into the horizon. And I totally get that. But there's a bunch of lore you likely missed in your panicked state as you cower, holding oh so tightly to your comfort tinderbox. Well, aren't you lucky? Because my lore train is literally just pulling into the station to shuttle you off to a land filled with notes and diary entries and flashbacks from Amnesia: The Dark Descent. Please exit to your right for more lore! At first glance, one might be excused for assuming this game doesn't have much to it, simply a series of scares, puzzles, and chases through the castle to reach the end. But if one is thorough in their search, and takes the time to read and appreciate the various notes, memory capsules, flashbacks, and even loading screen text, a very rich backstory slowly creeps into the light. There are 3 central characters involved in the plots surrounding Amnesia: The Dark Descent, namely Alexander of Brennenburg, the antagonist, Daniel, the main player, and our old husk himself, Heinrich Agrippa. I'll go through each of their stories one by one and then wrap up the 4 various game endings as all the stories converge at these events at the end of the game. The lore of this story stretches back to well before we join Daniel in his wanderings through Brennenburg Castle in 1839 Prussia. At some point in the distant past, the being we know as Alexander was banished from another world into ours for unknown reasons.
He's not the Messiah, he's a very naughty boy!
So for the next several centuries, he spends his life on Earth trying to find a way to get back home. His otherworldly intelligence and skill serves him well to obtain various roles through the centuries in Prussian nobility until finally taking ownership of the abandoned Brennenburg Castle and becoming the Baron of the region. It seems he was also a founding member of the Order of the Black Eagle, a chivalrous organization that served for the benefit of Prussia. Over the years, he kept his elongated life a secret by moving about the country and pretending to be his own heirs. But not without many within the Order of the Black Eagle knowing his secret. Because of this lineage maintaining secrecy, he was able to hold on to a strong influence in the region in perpetuity. Alexander began experimenting with various chemical mixtures to create aqua vitae, Latin for water of life, a liquid solution that had the power to extend life, and also it provided
gratuitous amounts of energy.
It was through the use of mysterious orbs and this vitae that he would be able to open the portal to return home. His attempts to create it chemically were unsuccessful, only resulting in the powerful acid formula that Daniel finds and uses in the game. Alexander carried on with his experiments and soon turned his attention to living creatures. The potion's not working. What about puppies? It seems that a creature experiencing extreme terror produces vitae in their blood, which can be extracted. At first, Alexander would experiment on animals, but they unfortunately didn't produce enough vitae for the effort to be beneficial. But humans, however, if you tickle them enough with feathers, they produce plenty of vitae. And by tickle, I mean torture. And by feathers, I mean slowly lowering a person onto a sharp metal spike up the backside as they scream and scream only so you can feed them an amnesia potion so they forget it happened, allowing you to scare them anew as you burn them alive in an iron cow the next morning. Yay! Rain, rain, go away while I murder this guy for his sweet vitae. But where does one acquire people? At the people store, you say? No, that's a stupid answer. The simple solution that Alexander came up with was to hire several men and pay them to secretly snatch people up from the surrounding woods and nearby hamlet of Altstadt and imprison them within the castle. They were doing it so much, in fact, that it even started some local folklore in Altstadt that creatures called gatherers lived in the woods and would grab people and carry them away, never to be seen again. But in a flashback scene and diary from the game, it seems these goons, led by a man named Wilhelm of the House of Garrick, became careless in their efforts, and out of fear of getting caught and exposed, Alexander locked them all in his wine cellar and offered them all a gift of as much wine as they could drink in celebration of their work. Poisoned wine, of course. It's not made explicitly clear in the game, but it can be inferred through the diary entries and loading screen text that these men weren't killed by the wine, but rather it transformed them into the deformed creatures that hunt Daniel in the castle. and who continue to grab people from the woods for Alexander's experimentation. These servants are also used by Alexander to assist in his various work and constructions around the castle, particularly, as detailed in one journal, the machine he intends to use to activate the portal home, which is a giant version of an otherworld device known as a traveler's locket. We'll leave Alexander be for the moment and move over to Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa. Agrippa was an explorer, and back in the mid-1500s he was searching for evidence of the Mithraic faith and their rare mystical orbs. He eventually found his way to Altstadt, and found an ancient Mithraic temple nearby that contained an orb within. Agrippa was immediately hunted by the Shadow for his orb, but the creature spared him for some unexplained reason after taking his orb back. Several years later, Agrippa and his student companion, Johann Weyer, soon met Alexander and began to study the orbs together. Alexander came to trust the men and told them of his true identity and goal to use the orbs to return home. At some point, thanks to the information from Agrippa about the temple nearby, Alexander was able to go and retrieve Agrippa's orb again. While performing the ritual to open the portal with this orb, it seems that Alexander was betrayed by Agrippa and Weyer. Weyer went through the portal first instead, leaving Alexander and Agrippa behind, and at some point, Agrippa's orb shatters. Alexander then seals Agrippa's soul in a dying husk of a body, but is not explained exactly how. He needs Agrippa's knowledge of the orbs to help him continue to figure out how to return home. At some point, Agrippa channels Weyer's voice from the other world, and Weyer pleads with Alexander to let Agrippa go, while also explaining to Alexander that he is trying, from the other side, to convince the powers that be to forgive Alexander of his banishment and allow him back home. He provides Alexander with a formula for a potion that will allow Agrippa's soul to be safely transported to the other world through a portal that Weyer will open from his side, the same potion that Daniel can choose to brew during the game. Alexander understandably doesn't trust the man that had already betrayed him, and instead continues in his hunt for a new orb and his own means to return home. Lastly, we turn to our protagonist, the Englishman, Daniel of Mayfair. His story begins with an expedition to Algeria with his friend and colleague Professor Herbert to uncover an archaeological site related to the legend of Tin Hinan, the mother of us all. As they find the tomb and Daniel leads the other men inside, Daniel becomes trapped as a large stone slab he passes under falls behind him, sealing him inside a chamber. As he pounds at the wall while his oxygen runs low, he sees a faint blue light behind him. Following the light, he finds an orb, and upon touching it, sees visions of an alien world and impossible geometry. Possible geometry. Sounds like he was just daydreaming in math class, actually. Eventually, he hears the sound of the stone slab being cleared, and his companions pulling him out of the tomb to safety, finding the orb sitting shattered in his hands. Professor Herbert, fearing for Daniel's health and the success of the expedition, sends Daniel home to London, England. He finds the orb pieces no longer fit together, as if they never even did in the first place. Over time, he comes to find that the pieces even change shape, color, and texture slightly, which leads him to contact eminent local geologist Sir William Smith about them, but not getting a ton of helpful information. He receives a notice that Professor Herbert and his expedition met with disaster, with all but one of his men dead or missing. Daniel retrieves Herbert's belongings, which were shipped back to London, and inside finds a journal detailing that they went back into the tomb, and everybody in the expedition team went mad, fighting with each other. It also mentions that when Daniel was trapped in the tomb, he was in there for an hour, yet his own perception of the time passing was only a few minutes. Lastly, Herbert noted in his journal that he also found an orb, which confuses Daniel greatly about whether the one that he found is even real. After an exhausting nightmare one evening, Daniel wakes up and finds he somehow has the knowledge of how to piece his orb back together. He uses some tar as a paste to fasten it, but finds that when all the pieces are back together, they fuse and force the tar out of the seams as they close up into a perfectly rounded shape. Daniel heads to the university looking for information and sneaks into Herbert's office, stealing an address book and some textbooks. He also meets with the Professor Taylor in the Faculty of History and asks about the orbs, and finds they may have inspired objects like the Globus Cruciger, which is basically the Holy Hand Grenade of Antioch for my Monty Python fans out there. On his way out of the university, he overhears that Sir William Smith, the geologist, was murdered recently. Unsettling, but surely coincidental. Daniel finds that his nightmares are getting worse and worse, as he spends days looking through Herbert's logs as well as sending letters out to the people he finds in the address book. He gets many responses, but only one that truly stands out, from Alexander of Brennenburg, stating, "I know. I can protect you. Come to Brennenburg Castle." Daniel resolves to visit his physician, Dr. Tate, to get some sedatives to help him sleep. Unfortunately, a few days later, Daniel is driven to a panic, as Professor Taylor and Dr. Tate both also wind up brutally murdered, eviscerated it seems. With the terrifying realization that he's being hunted setting in, he decides that his only option left is to trust the Baron and to travel to Prussia, staying at an inn called Der Mühle, German for the mill, in Altstadt before heading on to Brennenburg itself the next day. At the castle, Alexander teaches Daniel that something called the Shadow is chasing him because he touched the orb, and it is trying, slowly but surely, to catch up and take it back, killing everybody in Daniel's path. Soon, they get started on a ritual that Alexander claims will permanently banish the Shadow. Daniel quickly realizes that the ritual is just killing other people, albeit bad people, criminals, but Daniel felt he was at the bitter end of choices, his life or theirs. Alexander claims that the Shadow is still coming, and that they must keep up with the rituals. Daniel justifies continuing with the killings based on the fact that these people are degenerates, and that using their lives to save his is the only purpose they have left to offer, for his own salvation. He eventually nearly completely sheds his own humanity and empathy as the killings and rituals continue, sinking as low as kidnapping a local family of innocent dairy farmers, the Zimmermans, and killing both the parents and the 3 children, chasing one of the girls down that tried to escape and killing her. This finally causes him to question what he has become, and places the blame on being manipulated by Alexander, whom he vows to kill. Daniel then writes himself one final note, a reminder to his soon-to-be amnesiac self to find and kill Alexander in the inner sanctum below. He drinks the Damascus Rose potion, which is what he and Alexander were using to wipe the torture victim's memories between sessions, which also explains the pink drops we see on the ground near the start of the game. And he stumbles through the castle as the events of the Dark Descent unfold. Daniel makes his way through the castle's rooms and puzzles as traces of his memories seep through his self-inflicted mental fog. The sounds of meeting Alexander and following him through the castle, the screams and pleading from the numerous victims Daniel helped to torture and kill for the Vitae, until he stumbles upon the chamber where he encounters Agrippa's husk tied to the wall. After gathering all the pieces of Agrippa's old shattered orb, and the ingredients for Ware's potion from the torture chambers nearby, Daniel is captured by a group of gatherers and thrown in a cell. At this point, one of the 4 endings of the game can take place here in this cell. Alexander's voice can be heard telling us to stay put in the cell and let the Shadow come. Basically, just sit there and die. Great option. If we don't make any attempt to break out, we slowly see the growing presence of the fleshy patches, which represent the nearing proximity of the Shadow, as the cell is consumed by them, and Daniel is killed. Alexander thanks him for his sacrifice, now free to travel through the portal. The other 3 endings take place in the inner sanctum itself. Daniel can choose to either do nothing to disrupt the ritual, leading to Alexander flashing through the portal, leaving Daniel to be consumed by the Shadow the same way he was in his cell. Alternatively, Daniel can choose to topple over the surrounding electrical towers that are helping to power the portal. This causes the portal to vanish before it is able to open, and Alexander instead dies, apparently just disintegrating.
Yeah, it was pretty old.
For an unexplained reason, this appeases the Shadow, stopping its pursuit of Daniel as he walks out of Brennenburg Castle. Still not a great ending, as basically Daniel gets away with his freedom at the cost of possibly hundreds of murdered people, including innocent ones, just to save his own skin. More like Daniel of May not fair. The final ending is only possible if you concoct Ware's tonic, feed it to Agrippa, cut off his head, and bring it with you into the portal chamber. When the portal opens and Alexander begins floating towards it, you can yeet Agrippa's head into it first, causing it to close. Alexander dies, as in the previous ending, but the Shadow also arrives and kills Daniel as well. However, there is another scene where we see blue lights in the darkness, and hear Agrippa's voice pleading with Ware to help us, and assuring us that everything will be alright. But what exactly was Daniel's fate here? We don't currently know, but perhaps one day we'll find out. Oh, fuck. No, seriously. Thank you so much for watching and making it to the end of the video. I would really appreciate a like and subscribe and a comment down at the bottom for your... And always remember, be legendary.